Okay, so this is going to be our subject property for today's offer practice. And I don't know if anyone had a little bit of time in advance to go through some of the information that I sent through yesterday through Pumble. But our property is 6313 West Locust in Milwaukee. And if I just pull that up right now, you can also just click on the link. Let's just take a quick look at it. Can you guys see my MLS detail screen? Okay. Please say yes or no,
Yes.
because okay, great, because I can't see you. Okay, so we've got a 4-bed, 2-bath home that is in the city of Milwaukee. It's been on the market for about 5 days. Something that I always like to look at right away is I go towards the middle of the screen and look at private remarks. Sometimes you can learn a little bit of additional information about the home before you even go see it. Sometimes you'll see preferred closing dates or information as it pertains to binding acceptance, turnaround times, things like that. But here our private remarks just indicate that it is co-listed with Steph Kennard. It's got inclusions, exclusions, all the things. And then I'm just going to go to the documents. Oh, good. She uploaded them. We've got one document here that just highlights some of the list of improvements or seller updates. Can you guys still see my screen? It's going to be a PDF.
We don't see the PDF.
You don't see the PDF. Okay, well, that's obnoxious. I don't know why. Okay, well, we're just going to ignore that. You're going to have your condition report in here as well. So 2 documents that if I was going to be writing an offer on, that I would be uploading from MLS would be your condition report, and then the addendum S, the lead-based paint addendum, because the home was built before 1978. Those are going to be 2 documents that you're going to want to download from MLS and then upload them into zip forms so you can get your buyer's signature. But what I'm going to do now is, can you guys see my zip forms?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So I started to draft the practice offer in zip forms. But before we get to that, let's just go over some of the buyer profile, some of the assumptions that we made for the offer so you all could kind of be following the same direction and following the same strategy. So can anyone tell me who Paige Beckers is? This is a real person. I always try to do something that's like relevant to the week that we are doing offer practice. Okay. Paige Beckers is actually, she was a 2nd-year senior on the UConn women's basketball team, and they just became national champions on Sunday. And I'm actually a really big UConn fan. So Paige is going to be our buyer for today. And I'm sure with all of her NIL money, she could probably afford a little bit bigger of a house, but whatever, she's fine. So she signed a buyer agency with us just yesterday on April 7th. And she agreed to compensation for us of 2.4%. And that buyer agency is valid for 60 days. So because Paige signed a buyer agency agreement with us, what does that make Paige? Is she a customer or a client?
Client.
Client. And why that's important is we will have to indicate if the buyer is a client or a customer on the offer. So a little additional information about Paige. She's got to close on May 7th. She does want to have a home inspection and a radon inspection. She's already had conversations and done a little bit of her due diligence with a local lender, and she's pre-approved for up to $350,000. And these are some of the terms that she has been discussing with the lender in terms of how she's going to finance her deal. So she's going to put 20% down, and we're just going to say that mortgage rates right now are going to be 7.25%. So that is just a little bit of information that Paige has received and discussed with her lender. And hopefully you've been in those communications as well, so you understand where Paige is coming from as it pertains to her loan. Some additional assumptions that we're going to just make to help us with the offer. So in terms of seller preferences, I actually did call the listing agent. This is something that I would do anyways, if I was writing a legit real offer. But I asked the listing agent if there were anything that the seller was looking for with regards to binding acceptance. So how much time do they need to review and to get that offer back to us? And the listing agent said 24 hours would suffice. They do want to close as soon as possible. The home is vacant. So a sooner versus later closing time frame would be preferred. And then the seller is willing to pay up to 2.4% to a buyer's agent, and it's okay if we write that into the offer. So you'll see that as one of our contingencies in our offer that we will be submitting. So for today's practice, this isn't competitive offer practice. This is just blocking and tackling good old offer practice. So we're not going to get terribly fancy with regards to how we're crafting and strategizing for our offer. So we are going to offer them what they're asking in terms of price. So $250,000. I think they're asking $249,900. We'll give them $250,000. The inclusions I've listed here. And one thing that I do want to note specifically for this property, there was an inclusion that I'm actually leaving off and I'm putting in as an exclusion. So we're going to take a quick look at that so you can see where I got that from. Here on MLS, our inclusions are the fridge, stove, garbage disposal, washer and dryer, window AC unit for kitchen, portable AC unit, fireplace/TV stand in the living room, and then as an exclusion, the TV in the living room, but the stand was included. So for our practice today, and again, just because a seller is willing to include something doesn't mean your buyer might want it. It's something that you want to make sure that you discuss as you are talking about your offer terms with your buyer. So for our practice today, we actually are going to pretend that our buyer doesn't want that TV stand in the living room. So that was an inclusion in MLS, but we're going to write it as an exclusion in our offer. We know that our seller wants to close as soon as possible. We also know that Paige, our buyer, she's got her ideal date is May 7th. So it's a little bit less than 30 days, which is still pretty fast. 30 days now is somewhat of a common time frame. But we're just going to use that for our closing date. Earnest money is going to be 2% of the purchase price. Typically in our market right now, earnest money is anywhere between 1 to 3% of the purchase price. That could be higher, it could be lower. It's really part of the strategy that you're going to be developing with your buyer. In terms of contingencies, we are going to have a home inspection and give the seller the right to cure, but Paige is willing to cover those first $1,000 in repairs. We'd like to have a radon inspection, appraisal contingency. She's got a little bit of money in the event that we need to cover an appraisal gap. So you'll see how that comes to play in addendum AC. Financing, she's going to put the 20% down. And then also the final contingency we're going to add in is that the seller will be providing compensation to the buyer's firm. Okay, so let's get into the offer. Here's my offer. So we are dating the offer as of today, April 8th. And the licensee drafting the offer is the agent of the buyer, which means we have a buyer agency agreement with our buyer. Therefore, I have crossed off the other options in line 2, being agent of seller/listing firm or agent of buyer and seller. A lot of people forget to do this right out of the gate. So please make sure that you are doing your due diligence and striking the applicable items in either lines 1 or 2. Our buyer, we have her name here. We put the address 6313 West Locust, and this is in the city of Milwaukee and the county of Milwaukee. And if you aren't quite sure as to what the municipality type is, so this could be in the town of Waukesha or the village of Thiensville. If you aren't quite sure what municipality type the house falls in, just go back to MLS And here in the detail sheet, it gives you the municipality type. And again, the municipality type, this is information that has been entered in by the listing agent. So, we hope that it's accurate, but if you ever want to do a double check, you can also just go to tax info. And it's also here, taxed by the city of Milwaukee. Now, another thing that you have to put right up in that section, again, it's in the city of Milwaukee, county of Milwaukee. If you aren't sure what county the home falls in, also go back to MLS, and it is right there towards the top, county Milwaukee. Our purchase price is $250,000, or our offer price, so I've just put that number in line 10. And here are our inclusions. So we've got the fridge, stove, disposal, washer, dryer, that kitchen window AC unit, and then a portable AC unit. But in addition to the seller's personal property, that will not be included within the home. That's an exclusion. I've added that TV in the living room as well as the fireplace / TV stand. So even though the seller was willing to offer it as an inclusion, our buyer doesn't want it. We're writing it in as an exclusion. Binding acceptance. So this is the date with which we are asking the seller to review and send back an accepted offer to us. Binding acceptance means both parties have signed a copy of the agreement and both parties are in receipt of that signed accepted offer. So I've put April 9th here. Remember, our seller said that they were looking for 24 hours for binding acceptance. So I've just given them the full day of April 9th. If you wanted to be very specific with the time on April 9th or the time on any date that you put in here, you could also put something like, 6 p.m. on blank. Otherwise, if you don't specify the time, it runs through the full day of 11:59 p.m. The transaction is going to close on May 7th. Remember, this is the date that our buyer wanted to close on. Our seller also said as soon as possible. So this is within 30 days. If you think it's not fast enough, always pick up the phone, call the seller, and just let them know what you are thinking about putting for closing. But we're within 30 days and that's still pretty darn fast. And my zip forms automatically populates in line 48 at the place selected by the buyer. Typically, the buyer and the lender determine where the transaction will close. So I crossed off here at the place selected by the seller because that is contradicting what I've written in here on line 48. Moving into the top of page 2, at the top of every page of the offer to purchase, you're going to see a blank line for the property address. Make sure that your property address carries forward to the subsequent pages. Sometimes Zip Forms does it. Sometimes Zip Forms only includes a portion of the information. So just make sure that you've got that address stated up here. And actually, I just want to make sure, yeah, that zip code is correct. I'm just going to do a quick peruse to page 3, and it looks like it carried through. So very good. Earnest money. So we are delivering $5,000 in earnest money within 3 days of close or within acceptance. Again, our earnest money percentage, the assumption that we're making is the buyer wants to offer 2%. That is something, again, that as you are strategizing with your buyer, make sure that they are aware that that money is only given if the offer is accepted. And if the offer is accepted and earnest money is being delivered, that money will be withdrawn from that account immediately. So make sure that your buyers, if they need to move some money around, fine, give them that heads up. But that is something where if a check is deposited or if they're using trust funds, which is the, a wiring option through MLS, that money will be taken immediately. So make sure they've got it on hand. I'm not going to go through all this here, but this talks about what happens if earnest money or the offer doesn't actually get to closing. How does earnest money get dispersed? It's not necessarily an automatic given that money gets to go back to the buyer, or it's not an automatic given that a seller can keep it. So make sure that you kind of discuss this with your buyers as you are drafting the offer, so they're aware as to what might happen in the event that an offer does not get to closing. The condition report, so the state requires that all sellers provide a condition report. There might be some exceptions to this where a personal representative or somebody is selling it on behalf, like a trust, and they might not have ever lived in the property. Therefore, they can't really fill out the condition report. There is another form that a seller would actually fill out called like the seller's refusal to complete a condition report. But if the sellers lived in the home, they are responsible for filling out the condition report to the best of their knowledge. So here in line 107, this indicates that the seller has in fact provided a condition report, and that condition report is dated blank. So at the time when I did this practice offer, the condition report actually wasn't up in MLS yet, but it is now. And here it is, seller condition report. If I click on this, you guys can't see the PDF, but it does indicate that the seller filled out the report on April 1st. So that's going to be the date that I'm going to put back here in our offer. And again, this just indicates that the seller is in receipt and acknowledges that a condition report has been provided. It doesn't necessarily mean the buyer agrees with what's on it, but they are acknowledging that one has been provided. So I'm going to scroll through page 3. Those are a list of defects and things that a seller would be responsible for ensuring that they put on a condition report. But I'm going to go here to the top of page 4, and here's where we start getting into some of our first contingencies. So we know that our buyer wants to have a home inspection, and that home inspection needs to be conducted by a licensed inspector within the state. It can't be like the buyer's uncle who likes to look at homes. Like, it has to be done by a legitimate licensed home inspector. Maybe the uncle is a licensed home inspector, I don't know. But we've checked the box here indicating that our offer is in fact contingent on having a home inspection. Now, if there is a difference between an inspection and a test, and that's defined up here in the section above. But how I like to think about it is a home inspection is something that an inspector can visibly see. They're doing a visual inspection of the property. A test is where you actually take something off of the property and send it to a lab. So I'd like to think of eye inspection, eye visible look of the property, that's inspection. Test takes something away. So T for test, T for take. That's how I remember it. But back to our contingency, ours is contingent on having it inspected. And if there was something very specific that you saw right out of the gate, like at a showing, that you wanted to have inspected, maybe it was a chimney looked suspicious, or the basement looked suspicious, or a swimming pool, I don't know. If you want to write that very specific inspection in here, you can do that right out of the gate. And you have to indicate what it is that you want inspected beyond just the general home inspection. But your buyer also has the ability, if the home inspector comes through the house and they make some recommendations as to follow-up inspections that should be done, your buyer does have that right to do those, and they do have the right to access the property in order to have that other third party come in there and take a look at the area in question. This also indicates that the buyer is responsible for ordering the inspection and for any of the costs associated with it. And here in line 206, we have to indicate when we're going to have our contingency satisfied by. And if you don't put anything in the line here, it will automatically default to 15 days. But because we're closing, we are aiming to close within 30 days, I've shortened our inspection time frame to 10 days because I want to make sure we actually get through it. And usually the home inspection is the most stressful time during a transaction. So if we kind of wait 15 days or even past that, we're getting beyond the halfway point for our closing time frame, and you don't want to do that. So I put 10 days here, and that 10 days means we have to have the home inspection completed. We need to have any follow-up inspections completed, any estimates gathered. And then if we are trying to negotiate repairs or negotiate an adjustment in price or perhaps a closing cost credit, all of that has to be decided on and agreed to within these 10 days. So this just doesn't mean I am having the home inspection done in 10 days. There's a lot that transpires within these 10 days. So let's say we have a home inspection and the inspector recommends that somebody come out to look at the basement. Maybe there's some cracks in the basement foundation. We have that subsequent basement expert come out, and maybe the basement expert says, you know what, beams need to be put in the basement, and that's going to cost $15,000. So maybe that's something that your buyer actually wants to have the seller cure. They want them to fix that. As you're negotiating, if it's the buyer to act or the seller to actually make the repairs, or maybe your buyer's saying, you know what, I will take on the repair myself once we close, but I'd like an adjustment in price to offset that. Whatever you guys are trying to negotiate, you're having these conversations back and forth with the other side, with the listing agent. And once your buyer is very certain with what they want to ask for, you have to get in writing in an amendment. And that amendment must be signed by the other party in order to make it good to go. So what happens if we can't come to any agreement within those 10 days? If we're negotiating and your buyer's like, you know what, we can't come to an agreement, and I can't take on these repairs myself. What happens if you don't have an amendment signed and by both parties, and it's day 11? Does anyone know what happens then?
Is
If,
the
go ahead.
offer just null and void?
No, if it's day
Okay.
11, your buyer has just bought the house
Oh,
as is.
sorry. Yeah, opposite.
Just bought the house.
Yep.
You've lost all negotiation opportunities. But say it's like day 9 and you're really struggling to come to an agreement with the seller in terms of repairs, and your buyer was like, you know what? If they can't do this, then we're out. Well, then what happened is you send a notice of defects, and a notice is only signed by the party initiating the notice. It doesn't have to be signed by both. So when your buyer delivers a notice of defect, this is now showing the seller, hey, you got to fix all of these things. And you're really then giving the seller the right to cure everything that is listed in that notice. The seller has the opportunity to cure it, or the seller can say, no, I'm done. And if they say no, deal is dead. Now, everything is nicely outlined here in terms of like, how can a seller satisfy the contingency? So if we give the seller the right to cure the defect, and that is very common in today's market, in a seller's market, giving the seller the right to cure, the seller has the right to cure and can satisfy the contingency by delivering a notice back to the buyer, and I've put within 2 days. So they send a notice back to the buyer after the buyer delivered that notice of defects, stating that they're going to cure them. So again, we didn't come to an agreement in an amendment, and your buyers are like, this is what has to happen. If they can't do it, we're ready to walk. So your buyers issue a notice of defect. The seller then has 2 days to come back and indicate whether or not they will cure the defects by submitting another notice. Okay. They also can satisfy the contingency by sending a notice back saying they're going to cure the defects, curing the defects in a good and workmanlike manner, and sending back to the buyer a report detailing all the work that was done no later than 3 days prior to closing. But the offer is dead if that buyer sends a notice of defects, a timely delivery of notice of defects, meaning they send it before this 10 days is up. The offer is null and void if the buyer makes timely delivery of the notice of defects and sends the inspection report along, and the seller never had the right to cure to begin with, or the deal is dead if the seller had the right to cure and they're sending a notice back saying they're not going to do it. I know yesterday's contract training with Joan and Steph was all about the inspection contingency, so I would highly recommend that you guys go back and review that. They go into it with much more detail. But again, make sure you just familiarize yourself with the language that's in the documents, because a lot of your answers are right there in front of you. You just have to be very confident and know what it is that's included within the offer. Our buyer's also going to get a radon test. Most home inspectors can now do a radon test at the same time as the home inspection. There might be an incremental cost. So the inspector drops a kit in the basement. It has to stay there for 48 hours. The inspector will go back, pick it up. Usually this radon test contingency follows the same time frame as the home inspection. So I gave ourselves 10 days here to get that figured out. And now I'm giving ourselves 10 days to figure out the radon test. And oops, I didn't actually mark this, but we're going to give the seller the right to cure as well. If you don't strike one, it automatically gives the seller the right to cure. And then you're going to see a lot of this language looks very similar to the home inspection in terms of how things can get cured and when a deal is null and void. The next section I'm going to go to here is financing. So our offer is contingent on our buyer getting a loan. So I've checked the box here in line 248. And then here in line 249 is the type of loan that your buyer is trying to get. So it might be a 30-year conventional, a 15-year conventional, FHA, VA, whatever loan type it is, that's what you put in line 249. And we're going to try to get our loan commitment and everything finance related buttoned up within 21 days after the acceptance of the offer. So 21 days is not terribly fast. It's becoming a little bit more of a standard timeline for a lender. But what I always do when I'm writing an offer, I call the lender and I just kind of walk the lender through what we're trying to do from a deadline perspective. So as to avoid overpromising and under-delivering to the seller. So I would call the lender up and say, hey, I'm writing an offer for Paige Beckers. We're going to be offering $250. We're putting 20% down. We'd like to put 21 days as our loan commitment deadline. Is that something that you can help us achieve and accommodate? And if the lender says, yep, no problem, great. If the lender says, ooh, it's taking us a little bit longer, you need to understand like why and what is going to be a realistic deadline for you to put into line 250. But then in line 251 is actually the amount that your buyer is going to be getting a loan for. So this is your purchase price minus your down payment. And we know that Paige is putting 20% down. Therefore, if we're buying the house or we're offering $250 minus 20% down, which is $50,000, our mortgage payment or our mortgage is going to be for $200,000. We're getting a 30-year loan. So the term is not less than 30 years. It's going to be amortized over 30 years. And then the monthly payments of principal and interest. Again, this is just for the loan. It doesn't include any taxes or PMI or home insurance or special assessments. This is just the amount of principal and interest that the buyer is obligated to pay every month. And this reflects 20% down at a 7.25% interest rate. And I think I'm going to just double check that on my mortgage calculator. Please hold. Actually, that is not right. I didn't put 7.25. I did 7.2. So this actually changes my amount to $1,364.35. I've checked the box here in line 264, meaning we are getting fixed rate financing. So it's gonna be the same interest rate every year for the duration of the loan. And here's where I put the 7.25. Now, this is our first contingency that we are not gonna be writing into our offer, which is seller financing. And because I'm not including it within the offer, rather than leaving the box blank, I'm putting NA. If we were writing as a cash offer, I'd be filling out the section at the top of page 6, but I'm not. I've checked the box in line 308, indicating that our offer is contingent upon the buyer's lender having the property appraised. This also indicates that within 18 days, we're going to satisfy this contingency. And satisfying the contingency is really understanding, okay, we've offered 250. Maybe the appraiser comes in and says, yeah, the house appraises at 250. What do we do next if the house appraises? Anyone have an idea?
I think this is where you say celebrate, right?
Yes, this is where you just have to send a note to the listing agent. I probably pick up the phone too and just indicate appraisal came back, the value looks good, we move forward. If the appraiser comes back and says, you know what, this house is only worth 240. Now we've got a little bit of a situation because our buyer might not be able to get a loan for the original amount because the appraiser is telling us the house isn't worth what the buyer has offered. So when you have this appraisal contingency marked as part of your offer, it doesn't mean that you're just going to get an appraisal. What this actually does is give you a little bit more specificity around, okay, what could happen if it doesn't appraise? Well, we're going to give the seller the right to cure. And usually what that means is asking, we're going to have to negotiate the price a little bit. And in a seller's market, it's been very advantageous for buyers to include an appraisal gap, which we're going to do in our offer, meaning our buyers might come with a little bit of extra cash at closing to make up any difference between the purchase price and the appraised price if there's a difference or a gap.
Can I ask
But
a
let's say,
question, Kim?
yeah,
So have you seen times in which the offers don't have an appraisal contingency? So like in this case, Paige is pre-approved up to $350,000.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
she shouldn't have a problem obtaining the loan regardless of how it appraises, correct?
It depends. That's a conversation you're going to want to make sure you have with the lender.
Okay.
So there are some situations where you know that your buyer has extra cash and maybe they would just be able to make up the difference. By not striking the box, again, it doesn't mean that they're not going to have an appraisal,
Right.
but by leaving this contingency off, it's alluding to the seller, we're not going to be negotiating a difference with you. Like we're going to be coming with that full amount. We also have a few, and you know what I'll do? I'll send you guys some links too. We have contract trainings just on the appraisal contingency and financing. But an offer that doesn't have an appraisal contingency is very attractive to a seller. Your buyers, though, just need to understand what that means and what that means for them financially. And usually if the appraisal contingency is left off, you have had a very good conversation with the lender and your buyer so that everybody understands what's going on.
Okay.
But I
Thanks.
will send you guys some links to appraisal stuff, trainings. I'm just writing it down. Okay. Closing of the buyer's property contingency. This would mean if your buyer has to sell their current house in order to get a new house. We don't have to do that. So I put not applicable. And a bump clause typically accompanies a home sale contingency. It gives the seller the chance to bump the offer out of primary position. I want to say we're doing home sale contingencies and bump clauses next week in contract training. So more to come there. We are not writing as a secondary offer, meaning we're writing to be in the primary position. You would know if you were writing as a secondary offer because the house would already be under contract. And maybe a seller is looking to get a backup offer ready to go in the event the primary offer falls through. But you would know if you were writing as a secondary, but we are not today. So I'm going to speed through that. We have to indicate how we're going to prorate taxes for the title company and for the lenders. So there's a couple of different options here as to how things could get prorated. The most common one is this box 366, meaning we're going to take last year's taxes and just prorate it. And you don't have to figure out the amounts. The title company will help calculate that. But note, if you don't have any boxes checked, that's going to be the box that gets checked. There's some information here too about title and, you know, what title is, who pays for title, how it needs to be delivered. So please make sure you familiarize yourself with that. This is a lot of definitions on the next page. You know, a quick highlight in terms of maintenance. It also states that the seller has to keep the property in the same condition that it was in as of the date of the offer, minus any normal wear and tear. This also talks about property damage. So like what happens if a tree falls through the house? What do we do now? I'm not going to go over that right now, but it's all stated very clearly here as to what options might exist. Your buyer also has the opportunity to have a final walkthrough within 3 days prior to closing. So that's something that both parties agree to. This states here or summarizes here what happens if there's one party is in default of the contract. So we have to do our due diligence to try to complete the terms of the offer. Both parties do. But if somebody defaults or if somebody, you know, something happens, this outlines what legal options might exist. And again, you are not a lawyer. So if something is starting to come up where you think we might be needing to talk to a lawyer, you need to guide and direct your clients to do so. You cannot create any, or you cannot give any legal advice, nor would you want to. I'm going to quickly go to page 10. The last section here is box 543, the seller payment of compensation to the buyer's firm. So we know that our seller was willing to offer 2.4% of the purchase price to pay the buyer's agent. So we are putting it within the offer. We've checked the box and we've stated 2.4% of purchase price. Then in these blank lines here, some of this information was already populated for me as within my Zip Forms account. I would assume that it's the same for you guys too. But this information here at the top was automatically added. So if any contingency should expire on a Saturday, Sunday, federal state holiday, that contingency deadline is extended to the next business day. The only time that it doesn't matter if it's a holiday or a weekend is for binding acceptance. Binding acceptance can happen 365 days out of the year. But then I also added some of this language in here as it pertains to how a seller might cure a repair. So since we're having a home inspection and we're giving the seller the right to cure, I like to add a little bit more language here about like they have to use a professional licensed expert. How I got this language is by clicking on clauses. I go to global. There's 22 pre-approved clauses that our attorneys have looked at. And I'm going here to right to cure, and I literally just copied it and pasted it. You also could just click on the box, hit this add clause. Look for your clause, right to cure, and you can just insert it here too. In terms of delivery of documents, I've put the 2 listing agents here in the event we want to do it personally, like hand deliver it. They're for the seller, I'm for the buyer. And then I've also put, email is going to be our other way of delivery. And I've put the listing agent's, email addresses and then my email address here for the buyer. We are going to be including a couple of addenda, addendum A and addendum AC. So I make sure I include that. And then I put my name and my brokerage or my firm's name at the very bottom. A lot of people forget to do that. So that's the big offer in a very short nutshell. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to open up addendum A so you can see how I filled that out. And addendum A is used when maybe you're asking for a closing cost credit, or you might be negotiating a home warranty within the deal, or if the property is on a well and you want to get the well tested, the well water tested. It's also used if the home is on a private sanitary system, so like a septic or a mound or a holding tank. I think that's the third option, if you want to get those tested. But we're not doing any of that in our offer today. So you're going to notice here, a lot of these contingencies are marked NA, not applicable. So we're not asking for seller credit. There's no home warranty. There's no HOA fee. We're not getting anything tested. We're not getting the well and water tested. We're not getting any of the private sanitary stuff tested because it doesn't exist. But there's additional protections and language in here that are important for you to understand, as well as for your buyers to understand. So in this situation, I'm not checking any box on this document other than line 203. I'm also going to be including the lead-based paint addendum. So I've checked the box, labeled S. Then down here at the bottom on the left-hand side is all of the information for me as I'm representing the buyer, and I've got my firm information here, my firm address, license number, my license number. But then over here is on the right-hand side is what you need to put for the seller. So for the listing firm, and you can get all of this information from the MLS detail sheet. So if I go to report, and here is all of the information that I would need for the listing agent. Their LO means listing office license number, so their brokerage license number, and LA means listing agent license number. So this is where I take that information and I drop it into addendum A over here on the right-hand side. And then the last document that we're going to go over is addendum AC. And addendum AC is a newer addendum, and it includes 3 specific contingencies. One is if you have a home inspection and if your buyer is willing to cover up to a certain amount in repairs. It's also used if you're going to have an appraisal gap, if your buyers are willing to cover a little bit of a difference in the appraised price versus the actual or the purchase price, if they've got some cash. It's also used if there's an escalation clause. For our practice today, we're using the top 2, the inspection contingency and the appraisal gap. So this indicates that our buyer agrees not to submit any notice of defect or an amendment for repairs or credits unless the cumulative cost to repair those defects exceeds blank amount of money. And I've just put $1,000 here. That was also in your offer instructions. The higher amount of money, the more attractive this is to the seller. The higher amount of money also makes it a little bit less attractive to your buyer because that means you're not going to be going to the seller and asking for them to make any repairs or give you any credits for anything within that amount of money. So estimates need to repair things. They need to be received by qualified independent professionals. This also indicates too that the buyer is responsible for paying any costs that might be necessary to get the estimate. So some companies are now charging for estimates. And then the parties agree to the costs, and the estimates obtained are really only used for this specific provision. Now, when I check this box here, I'm also giving the seller the opportunity to get estimates as well. I don't really have a problem giving us as a buyer's agent. The more information, kind of the better to me. So if the seller wants to also get estimates, by all means, they can get estimates. Now, what happens if we have a roof situation and we have a roofer come out and our roofer says it's going to cost $15,000 to repair something. And the seller also had a roofer come out and that roofer says, yeah, it's only going to cost 10 grand. Well, now we've got two different estimates. So what do we do? This actually indicates here what we should do. And the parties agree that we're going to average the estimates. By checking this box on line 25, this also gives either party an opportunity to extend the home inspection contingency in our original offer to purchase, and I've put in 5 days. So if you recall, in our offer, we had a home inspection contingency deadline of 10 days. If we're maybe struggling to get estimates in, or if we're, if we can't get somebody in until day 11, this gives us a little bit extra cushion to extend that deadline. However, you have to get it in writing by delivering a notice that you are in fact going to be extending the inspection contingency deadline, and you have to do it and deliver that to the other party prior to that original deadline expiring. So maybe we're on day 9 of our inspection contingency and we can't get that roofer in until day 11. We need to be sending a notice within that 10-day inspection deadline. We need to send a notice indicating that the home inspection contingency is hereby moved to blank day. It's just not automatic. You do have to deliver it in writing through a notice. And then in terms of our appraisal gap, we know based on our offer instructions that buyer was willing to cover up to $2,500 in the event the appraised price comes in lower than the purchase price. So our buyer's willing to cover up to $2,500 in difference. So say we offer $250 and maybe the house appraised at $249. What would happen? Our buyer, in this example, would be on the hook to cover that $1,000 difference up to from $249 to $250. We never go beyond what that purchase price was going to be. Okay. So just because she had $2,500 doesn't mean she has to spend all $2,500. But it all is outlined here too, that the buyer represents they've got the funds to cover the gap, and they're hereby prohibited from sending a notice objecting to that appraised value unless that appraised value comes in lower than our purchase price minus the gap. Seller has the right to cure the appraisal contingency by delivering written notice to the buyer, officially adjusting that purchase price to the value shown on the appraisal report plus the gap.
So I'm a little confused here. So if the offer they offered was 250,000 and then it was appraised at 249, the
Mhm.
buyer would pay 1,000?
Yes, they're paying they're paying the gap.
So why would the buyer pay 1,000 if they already offered 250?
The appraisal is coming in low. If an appraiser comes in and says the house is worth $249,000,
Mm-hmm.
the lender is not going to give them a loan for that full amount. But what an appraisal gap does is shows the seller, hey, if something doesn't appraise, I'm willing to put in a little bit of my extra cash at closing to make up some of the difference. Does that make sense? This was,
No.
so this was becoming, in like 2020 and 2021, buyers were offering like $100,000 over asking. And sellers were very excited when that was happening, right? They're like, oh my gosh, how exciting. But then the buyer's lender would come in and have an appraisal done. And the appraiser was saying, there's no way this house is worth $100,000 more than what you know, the asking price was. So then buyers were having to go back to sellers and say, I can't get my loan for that 300 or for that higher amount because my lender is telling me that the house isn't worth, or the appraiser is telling us the house isn't worth that. So then sellers were having to knock the price down, right? To meet what the appraised value was. So when you have a little bit of an appraisal gap, meaning the buyer has some cash beyond the loan that they're going to get that they will bring to closing, this helps make up a little bit of a difference if the house actually doesn't appraise for that original purchase price. You're trying to show the seller that you're going to do as much as you can to make sure that what you're offering in terms of price is what they're actually going to be getting at closing.
Oh, okay, so I think I get it now. So if they offered 250, but it appraised at, let's say, like 245, then the loan would only be for 245.
Correct.
Oh, okay. I understand.
So buyers were going like gangbusters saying like, hey, I'll give you, you know, all this money over. And then 2 weeks later, they were like, just kidding. I can't get a loan for that amount. So sellers were getting smart and saying like, if that's what you want to pay, like I want to have a little bit of reassurance that you're not going to come to me and ask me to like drop the price so significantly. But again, after this, since I've got everybody's email, I will send you guys a link to a former or a previous contract training that talks specifically about like appraisals. So I think it'll help you out. Okay, so if anybody wants to do a practice offer, please send one to me by 1 o'clock tomorrow. In that practice offer, it should be included as one PDF. And in that practice offer, you'll have an offer to purchase, addendum A, addendum AC. You'll have a condition report. You'll have an addendum S. And you should have a pre-approval letter too, but we don't have one. But those are the documents that you would include within your offer packet if you were legitimately submitting an offer for this property. So if you send it to me by 1 o'clock, I will take a look at it. And I will give you guys any feedback. And I highly encourage you to practice because the more reps you get in, just the more confidence you have when it is actually time to submit a true legitimate offer. And as Charlie always says, like practicing on your clients is malpractice. So don't make the first offer that you're ever going to write the offer that you actually need to legitimately submit. But if that does happen, you have help. But I thank everybody for jumping on. I hope you found it helpful. And again, I'll send you a quick email after this with some links to some additional contract trainings if you're interested in checking them out. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.